They made it illegal to say Africans built this, the truth about Great Zimbabwe. Somewhere in the heart of southern Africa, in the country we today call Zimbabwe, there are walls. Not small walls, not ruins you have to squint to imagine. Walls that stand 11 meters high, walls that stretch for 250 meters. Walls built from over 1 million carefully cut granite blocks, each one fitted together so precisely, so deliberately, that no mortar was used. Not a single drop, just stone on stone on stone. These walls have stood for over 700 years. They survived rain, heat, centuries of neglect, and something far more destructive than weather. They survived the deliberate, organized attempt by an entire colonial system to erase the people who built them from history. This is the story of Great Zimbabwe, the story of a civilization so advanced, so sophisticated, that when European colonizers arrived and saw what had been built here, they made a decision. Not to celebrate it, not to study it honestly, but to lie about it, systematically, officially, for decades. Today, on the African Memory, we tear that lie apart, stone by stone. This is not just history, this is your history. Let's remember it together. What is Great Zimbabwe? Let's start with what Great Zimbabwe actually is, because most people, even many Africans, have never been taught its full story. Great Zimbabwe is a ruined city, a medieval stone city located in the southeastern hills of modern-day Zimbabwe. It was the capital of the Kingdom of Zimbabwe, a powerful and wealthy Shona civilization that flourished between roughly 1100 and 1450 AD. The name Zimbabwe itself comes from the Shona language, Zimba Zamabwe, meaning houses of stone, or by some translations, venerated houses. This was not a settlement, this was not a village, this was a capital city, the political, spiritual, and economic heart of an empire. The site covers nearly 800 hectares. It had 3 main sections: the hill complex, built on a granite hill, likely the royal and spiritual center; the great enclosure, the largest ancient structure in sub-Saharan Africa; and the valley ruins, where the general population lived and worked. At its peak, Great Zimbabwe was home to between 10,000 and 18,000 people in the 13th and 14th centuries. In Africa, a city of up to 18,000 people, with sophisticated stone architecture, long-distance trade networks, and a centralized political system. And here is where it gets even more remarkable. Archaeologists excavating Great Zimbabwe found Chinese porcelain, Persian pottery, Arab coins, gold, ivory, evidence of trade connections stretching from the African interior all the way to China through the Indian Ocean trade network. Great Zimbabwe was not isolated, it was connected to the world. It was part of the world. It was one of the great trading civilizations of the medieval era. Now, here is where the story takes a turn that should make every one of us angry and determined. When European explorers and colonizers arrived in southern Africa in the 19th century and encountered Great Zimbabwe, their reaction was not wonder, it was not curiosity, it was panic. Because what they saw directly contradicted everything their colonial ideology required them to believe about Africa. The idea that Africa had no history, no civilization, no architecture, no sophistication. The idea that African people needed to be civilized by Europeans. A city like Great Zimbabwe, with its towering walls, its evidence of international trade, its urban population of tens of thousands, was an existential threat to that narrative. So they did something extraordinary. They invented another explanation. The first European to formally document Great Zimbabwe was a German geologist named Karl Mauck in 1871. And when he saw the ruins, he concluded concluded with no evidence whatsoever that they must have been built by the Queen of Sheba, or Phoenicians, or ancient Arabs, or some other non-African civilization. Not because the evidence pointed there, but because the evidence could not, in his mind, point to Africans. This theory was then picked up, amplified, and institutionalized by the white minority colonial government of Rhodesia, what is today Zimbabwe. They didn't just believe the lie, they enforced it. A man named Richard Hall was appointed as the official curator of Great Zimbabwe in the early 1900s. And Hall, determined to find evidence of a non-African origin, actually destroyed archaeological layers at the site. Physically dug them up and threw them away. Evidence that would have confirmed African construction and occupation was eliminated in the name of protecting a colonial fantasy. And it got worse. The white Rhodesian government made it illegal for archaeologists working in the country to publicly state that Great Zimbabwe was built by Africans. You could lose your job, you could be expelled from the country. The suppression of this truth was not casual, it was official government policy. But here is the part of this story that gives me hope, because the truth, when it is real, is very difficult to bury forever. As early as 1905, a British archaeologist named David Randall McIver conducted a thorough scientific investigation of Great Zimbabwe. And his conclusion was clear, documented, and evidence-based. Great Zimbabwe was built by Africans, specifically by the ancestors of the Shona people who still live in Zimbabwe today. The colonial establishment attacked him immediately, dismissed his findings, questioned his methods, did everything possible to discredit him, not because his science was wrong, but because his conclusion was inconvenient. Then in 1929, another archaeologist, Gertrude Caton Thompson, conducted an even more comprehensive investigation. She was meticulous, she was thorough, she examined every layer, every artifact, every piece of evidence available. Her conclusion, identical to Randall McIver's, Great Zimbabwe was built by Bantu African people. The ancestors of the Shona, no Phoenicians, no Queen of Sheba, no ancient Arabs, just Africans, building one of the greatest structures in the medieval world. The colonial government ignored her too, because by that point the lie had become policy, and policy, especially colonial policy, does not surrender to evidence easily. It would take until Zimbabwean independence in 1980, nearly a century after Karl Marx first documented the ruins, for Great Zimbabwe to be officially and publicly recognized as an African achievement. The new nation even named itself after it, Zimbabwe, Houses of Stone, reclaiming the name, reclaiming the meaning. So what was the Kingdom of Zimbabwe actually like? What kind of civilization built something like this? The Kingdom of Zimbabwe was built on two things, gold and cattle. The interior of southern Africa was extraordinarily rich in gold. And the Shona people who controlled Great Zimbabwe sat at the center of a trading network that connected the African interior to the Swahili coast, and from there to Arabia, Persia, India, and China. Gold from the Zimbabwe plateau flowed east to the coast. In return came porcelain, glass beads, cotton cloth, and other luxury goods from across the Indian Ocean world. Great Zimbabwe was not just a city, it was a trading hub at the center of a global network. The rulers of Great Zimbabwe, known as the Mambo, were both political and spiritual leaders. The hill complex where they lived was considered sacred. Religious ceremonies, royal decisions, and the management of trade all happened within those stone walls. And the walls themselves, the engineering of them, deserve a moment of real appreciation. The builders of Great Zimbabwe quarried granite from the natural rock formations of the region. They heated the rock with fire and cooled it rapidly to split it into usable blocks. They shaped those blocks and stacked them without mortar, using a technique that relied entirely on precision, balance, and an extraordinary understanding of the material. The walls have curved sections, decorative patterns, chevron designs running along the top of the great enclosure. This was not functional building. This was architecture. This was design. This was art. These were not people surviving. These were people thriving. Great Zimbabwe was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1986. It is one of the most important archaeological sites in the entire world. And yet, how many of us grew up knowing its story? How many history classes across Africa and around the world spent time on the pyramids of Egypt but never mentioned the stone city of Zimbabwe? How many textbooks covered the ancient Greeks and Romans but skipped the Kingdom of Zimbabwe entirely? This is not an accident of curriculum design. It is the lingering fingerprint of a colonial education system that was built deliberately to make African children grow up believing their continent had nothing to offer the story of human civilization. But here is the truth that Great Zimbabwe insists on simply by still standing. African people have always built. African people have always traded. African people have always governed, designed, engineered, and created. Not because someone gave them permission, not because someone came and showed them how, but because that is what human beings do. And Africans are, and have always been, fully human. The walls of Great Zimbabwe are not just stones, they are evidence, they are testimony. They are a message sent across 700 years that says, we were here, we built this, and no lie, however official, however long-lasting, could make us disappear. Great Zimbabwe still stands. After 700 years of rain and heat, after a century of colonial denial, after decades of deliberate erasure, it still stands. And so do we. This is the African memory. We come here every video to pick up the pieces of a story that was broken on purpose and put them back together. Because you cannot know where you are going until you know fully and honestly where you came from. If this video moved you, share it. Send it to someone who has never heard of Great Zimbabwe. Leave a comment telling me what you knew before this video and what you know now. And subscribe, because this channel is just getting started and the stories we still have to tell will change the way you see this continent forever. The African Memory, remembering Africa, reclaiming meaning. I'll see you in the next one.